Welcome to DIYEasyCrafts.com. How to make an easy Ebay Damascus Steel knife. Actually, in this video, we're going to make two Damascus Steel knives out of some Damascus steel, which I obtained very inexpensively on eBay. I'm going to make two kind of experimental knives using a variety of different techniques. The first one is going to have a full tang pinless handle with copper guards and a brass liner. That brass liner is also going to be incorporated when we do the spine work. The spine work is going to be two-tone and go right through that liner into the spine of the knife, giving a really unique two-tone effect to the spine work. The second knife, instead of a wood handle, is going to have a delrin handle, which has been scalloped just with a Dremel wheel. It's going to be pinned, and it's going to have a thicker copper liner. That copper liner is going to run right through and become the guard to the knife. So two distinctly different knives with very, very similar shapes. We're going to only use standard tools. Basically, the entire knife can be made with a disc grinder, a belt sander. You don't even need the belt sander, but it helps to have one, and an electric drill. Before we get started, I did anneal this Damascus steel. When I received it, it was very hard. I'm not going to cover annealing and hardening and tempering in this video. I do cover that in a separate video, and I'll put a link at the tail end of this one. But you do want to anneal it or soften the steel before you start to work with it. We're going to start the project just by sketching out the shape of each knife on the blank. I just used, a Sharpie marker. And then we're going to start to chop or grind those blanks into shape. Now I use a disc grinder with a cutoff wheel. This is a very quick process, and I make as many straight cuts as I can, and I remove the bulk of the material that has to be removed with this cutoff wheel. It's a lot faster than grinding. You're just going to cut off every piece that you can possibly cut off without entering the inside of those marked lines. Now for the handle, the internal curve of the handle, what I did was I just made some plunge cuts straight in, and then I came in from the side and cut away those notches. So you're going to end up with a very, very rough cut blank. That's the basic shape of the knife, but it's going to have some real rough edges on it. You can see in the handle you've got those straight plunge cuts that were cut away to the best of my ability with the cutoff wheel. The next step is to use the same disc grinder, but I'm now going to use a grinding wheel on it. This process is going to basically grind away all of those rough edges and start to shape that blank into the final shape, or the curves into those final shape of the knife. You can take your time here and really get it as close as possible. Both of these steps are relatively quick. I cut out both of these knives really within, probably a half hour or 45 minutes. Having a little vise comes in very handy. And this blade does get very hot, so just be careful, don't burn yourself. And here they have one of the blanks cut almost, completely down to the marked lines from our original sketch. From here, I am going to go to the belt sander. Now I just have a small 4-inch belt sander, nothing special. But the belt sander is really nice, especially for the curves. You can really smooth out some of those edges. You start off with a coarser grit, and as we move along in the process, you can change that belt to a smoother grit and get rid of all the rough lines, deep cut marks on the blade. The belt sander also makes pretty quick work of the grinding to the final shape. Now the next step, I actually go back to the disc grinder. I don't think many people do this, but I use a flat sanding wheel, and you can again get these in a variety of different grits. And I use this to grind away or to sand away the majority of the grind marks and to start to bring that knife into shape. And what I mean is to taper down the blade so that the blade edge of the knife is thinner than the spine of the knife. And again, you can change the grit on those flap sanders so that you can get rid of quite a few of the marks from the grinding. I then go back to the belt sander with a smoother belt on it, and I'm also going to really start to bring that knife shape and thickness, basically finishing the shape of the knife and bringing the knife almost to an edge. You want to keep looking at that edge, flipping it back and forth, making sure you don't grind too much on one side, everything's even. Now, I played around with these blades. Both of these are kind of an experiment. I didn't want to acid bath either one of these blades until after the handles were attached. In hindsight, I probably should have. My rationale was I didn't want the Damascus lines on the tang or on the spine of the handle. This knife, I'm going to do some of the spine work before I mount the handle. Spine work is usually done with a variety of files. I happen to like to use a Dremel grinder. You can either use a grinding wheel, or what works really nice is one of the small diameter drummed sanding wheels. Spine work usually really enhances the handle, and you really appreciate the spine work after you attach the handle. What I'm doing with these is something a little bit different. So on one knife, I'm actually going to glue on the liners. And the liners basically are just a flat piece of copper or brass that I'm using. That's going to go in between the tang or the handle of the blade and the handles that I'm going to put on. And for the two-tone effect on this spine work, on one of the knives, I'm actually going to do this spine work with the Dremel grinder and grind right through that copper and into the steel. So the finished product is going to give a really unique two-tone effect to the spine work and really make that handle pop a little bit. You can see the spine work starting to take shape. It's basically just grinding grooves that are equally spaced one side and the other, and then you can put notches on them with a file if you desire. I'm going to add the handle to this knife. This one is the knife with the delrin handles that are pinned. I also use a two-part epoxy to hold that delrin in place. And as I mentioned before, on the delrin, I'm actually going to use the Dremel grinder with a little sanding wheel and just make some scallop marks on that smooth delrin and give it a nice textured look to it. Also feels really nice in the hand with the textured look. Once the handles are mounted, you can continue to shape them either by hand with sandpaper or the Dremel sanding wheel or back on the belt sander like I'm doing here. Smoothing over all of the edges, making sure that the wood and the liner and the steel is all uniform in size and shape. And you can start to appreciate the tang work, the spine work on this knife. For this knife I used a teak handle. A friend of mine had some scrap teak laying around, and it really worked out well. Now here's the blade, polished down to about 600 grit sandpaper, and this is now ready to dip into the muriatic acid. I know other people use different types of acid. I wanted to make both of these knives as easy and as inexpensive as possible. I wanted to use muriatic acid because it's readily available at most hardware stores. It doesn't take long for this steel to start showing those characteristic Damascus lines. Depending on what the Damascus was made out of, what steels the Damascus was made out of, you only have to submerge it in the muriatic acid for anywhere from 4 to 24 hours. Then you completely rinse it off. Because I did the acid bath or the acid etching after the handles were applied, I did have to repolish all of the copper or brass on the handles after the knives were acid bathed. But here's the finished products. This is the delrin handled pinned Damascus steel knife. Spine work on the teak handled knife, the two-tone spine work. And of course, even with this relatively inexpensive Ebay Damascus steel, we still have those characteristic Damascus steel lines. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please check us out on the web at DIYEasyCrafts.com. Be sure to check out our other how-to videos. And if you like this video, I ask that you please like and subscribe to this YouTube channel.